I always knew my brother, Jason, was the golden child in our family. It wasn't anything dramatic or abusive. My parents never outright neglected me or told me they loved him more. It was subtle. The way they bragged about his accomplishments while mine were acknowledged with a simple, "That's nice." The way they rearranged their schedules for his football games but couldn't make it to my debate tournaments because they were just too busy. The way they helped him with the down payment on his house while I was still paying off my student loans on my own. I had made peace with it, or so I thought. I'd built my own life, found success in my career as an architect, and surrounded myself with friends who valued me. I had Luke, my boyfriend of 3 years, who showed me what unconditional support actually felt like. Then came the weddings. Jason proposed to his girlfriend Melissa 2 years ago. Within hours, my mom had created a wedding planning spreadsheet, and my dad had called their financial advisor to discuss liquidating some investments. They threw an elaborate engagement party at their country club, invited all their friends, and raised crystal flutes of champagne to toast the most perfect couple. What followed was a year of wedding planning that consumed every family conversation. The venue, a historic mansion overlooking the ocean, the flowers imported from Holland, the dress, designer, custom-made, the catering, a celebrity chef my mom had seen on Food Network. No expense was spared. I tried to be supportive, helping Melissa with some of the details, and even designing custom invitations as my gift to them. The weekend of Jason and Melissa's wedding arrived, a 3-day extravaganza that included a welcome dinner, the ceremony and reception, and a farewell brunch. I stood in my bridesmaid dress that I had paid for myself along with all the associated costs, and watched my parents beam with pride as they wrote check after check, totaling well over $50,000. "Nothing's too good for our son on his special day," my mom kept saying to anyone who would listen. I was genuinely happy for my brother. Despite the preferential treatment, Jason and I had always been close. He deserved a beautiful wedding, and Melissa was wonderful. But I couldn't help the small voice inside that wondered, would they do the same for me? I got my answer 6 months later when Luke proposed during a weekend trip to the mountains. It was perfect, intimate, and meaningful, just like our relationship. We called our families that evening to share the news. Luke's parents were ecstatic, already talking about venue options and asking about dates. My parents' response was decidedly less enthusiastic. "Oh, that's nice," my mom said, the same tone she used when I told her I'd gotten a promotion. "Congratulations." "When are you thinking of doing it?" my dad asked, his voice tight in the way it got when he was calculating costs in his head. "We're not sure yet," I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. "Maybe next spring." There was a pause, and then my mom said, "You two should just elope. It's so much cheaper, and honestly, weddings are a waste of money." I nearly dropped the phone. "A waste of money," I repeated. "You just spent $50,000 on Jason's wedding 6 months ago." "That was different," she said dismissively. "Anyway, think about it. A small courthouse ceremony, maybe a nice dinner after. No fuss, no muss." I ended the call shortly after, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. Luke held me as I cried, not understanding how my own parents could value my happiness so much less than my brother's. The next few weeks were tense. My mom sent me links to articles about the benefits of eloping and how to have a wedding for under $1,000. When I broached the subject of a real wedding, my dad grimaced and said, "We are not really in a position to help much financially right now. The market's been rough." The same market that had apparently recovered enough for them to buy a new boat the previous month. Luke and I discussed our options. His parents had generously offered to contribute, but they weren't wealthy and had 2 other children who would eventually get married. We had savings, but were hoping to use that for a house down payment. We could scale back our plans, maybe do something small and simple. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the message it sent. My marriage, my happiness, was worth less than my brother's. One evening, as Luke and I were discussing potential compromises, thought struck me. "What if we did elope?" I said slowly. Luke looked surprised. "Is that what you want? I thought you wanted your family there." "I do," I said, just not my parents. And that's when the plan began to form. Over the next few months, I told my parents we were considering their advice to elope. They seemed relieved, occasionally asking vague questions about our plans, but never pressing for details. Meanwhile, Luke and I were secretly planning the wedding of our dreams. We found a beautiful garden venue in Tuscany, Italy, a place I'd always wanted to visit. We set a date in early June, when the weather would be perfect. We kept the guest list small but meaningful. Luke's parents and siblings, my Aunt Susan, my mom's sister who had always treated me like her own daughter, my closest friends from college and work, and yes, Jason and Melissa. Telling Jason was the hardest part. I invited him and Melissa over for dinner one night and explained everything. How our parents had dismissed my wedding, how they'd suggested we elope, and how I'd decided to take their advice, with a twist. I'm not inviting Mom and Dad, I finished. And I need to know if that's going to be a problem for you. Jason was quiet for a long moment, then said, "They really told you to elope after everything they did for our wedding?" I nodded. He exchanged a look with Melissa. "I knew they played favorites, but that's cruel." "We'll be there," Melissa said firmly. "And we won't tell them." "Are you sure?" I asked. "I don't want to put you in an awkward position." "They put us in an awkward position," Jason said. "Not you. They're my parents, and I love them, but what they're doing isn't right." With Jason's support, the final piece fell into place. We sent out our invitations, booked our flights and accommodations, and arranged for a photographer to capture every moment. Luke's mom helped me find a beautiful dress that made me feel like a princess. My Aunt Susan, who lived in Europe, coordinated with local vendors to ensure everything would be perfect. As the date approached, my parents occasionally asked if we'd set a date for our elopement. I would vaguely mention that we were thinking sometime in June, and they would nod disinterestedly and change the subject. "They're not even curious enough to ask for details," I told Luke one night. "How sad is that?" He pulled me close. "It's their loss. Our wedding is going to be magical, with or without them." The day finally arrived. Standing in that Tuscan garden, surrounded by people who truly loved and supported us, I felt no regret about my decision. The ceremony was perfect, emotional and intimate, with the rolling hills of Italy as our backdrop. We danced under string lights as the sun set, drank local wine, and ate incredible food. My Aunt Susan gave a toast that made everyone cry, talking about how proud she was of the woman I'd become and how lucky Luke was to have found me. Jason also spoke, his voice cracking as he welcomed Luke to the family and wished us the happiness we deserved. It was everything I'd ever wanted, and my parents' absence was barely felt. Spent the next week honeymooning along the Amalfi Coast, blissfully disconnected from reality. It wasn't until we returned home and began sharing photos on social media that the storm hit. My phone exploded with notifications, texts and calls from my parents, increasingly frantic and angry as they realized what had happened. "You got married in Italy without telling us?" my mom's first text read. "How could you do this to us? We're your parents," came the next. I didn't respond immediately, taking my time to settle back home and gather my thoughts. Finally, I called them. "How could you?" my mom demanded as soon as she picked up. "How could you get married without us? In Italy of all places. Do you know how embarrassing this is? Our friends are asking why we weren't at our own daughter's wedding." "You told me to elope," I said calmly. "That's what I did." "We met at a courthouse or something, not a... she sputtered, clearly having seen the photos of our beautiful venue. "We saw Jason was there," my dad cut in, his voice cold. "And Susan, how could you invite them and not us?" "I invited people who supported my relationship and who I knew would be happy to be there," I replied. "We're your parents!" my mom cried. "Yes, you are. The same parents who told me my wedding wasn't worth investing in, who couldn't even pretend to be excited when I got engaged, who made it abundantly clear that my marriage was less important than Jason's." "That's not true," my dad protested. "We never said that. You didn't have to say it. You showed it in every possible way." There was silence on the other end. "I didn't exclude you to hurt you," I continued. I excluded you because I wanted to be surrounded by people who value me and my happiness. On my wedding day, I didn't want to look out and see the people who should love me most looking resentful about being there. We would never, my mom began. Wouldn't you? I interrupted, because when I told you I was engaged, you immediately started talking about how I should do something cheap. When Jason got engaged, you started liquidating investments. More silence. I'm not angry anymore, I said, surprised to find it was true. I had a beautiful wedding with people who love me. I'm married to an amazing man. I'm happy. I just wish you could have been happy for me too. After I hung up, Luke asked how it went. About as well as expected, I said. They're hurt and angry. They don't understand why their actions have consequences. Do you regret it? He asked gently. I thought about our perfect day in Tuscany, about the genuine joy on the faces of our guests, about how light and loved I had felt. Not for a second, I said. The fallout continued for weeks. Extended family members called, some to express support, others to tell me how I had broken my parents' hearts. Jason caught the worst of it, with our parents feeling betrayed that he had chosen sides. To his credit, he stood firm. It wasn't about taking sides, he told them. It was about supporting my sister on one of the most important days of her life. Slowly, the storm began to subside. My parents, realizing that their anger wasn't accomplishing anything, attempted reconciliation. First came a stiff card in the mail with a modest check inside, far less than they'd spent on Jason's wedding photography alone. Then came awkward invitations to dinner, during which they carefully avoided any mention of the wedding. It took nearly a year before my mom finally asked to see the wedding album. As she turned the pages, taking in the stunning venue, my beautiful dress, the joy on everyone's faces, I saw something shift in her expression. It was lovely, she said quietly. You looked beautiful. It wasn't an apology, but it was something, a small acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, I deserved something lovely too. Luke and I recently celebrated our second anniversary with another trip to Italy, this time inviting my parents to join us. They declined, saying international travel was too complicated. The old me might have been hurt by this, might have seen it as another rejection, but the woman who got married in a Tuscan garden, surrounded by true love and support, she just shrugged and planned a magical anniversary trip with her husband. Because I've learned that happiness isn't about getting everyone's approval. It's about choosing to surround yourself with people who celebrate your joy rather than diminish it. Sometimes those people are family. Sometimes they're not. And sometimes the best. Revenge isn't confrontation or argument. Sometimes it's simply living well and creating your own happiness, even if that means eloping to Italy without your parents. Let me know what you think in the comments below.